All right, let me paint the picture for you. I'm 35, my name's Alex, and for the past 15 years, I've poured everything into building up my dad's plumbing business, Wilson Plumbing. And by everything, I mean everything: the late nights, early mornings, weekends spent on call while my friends were off living their best lives. While they went off to college or started their own thing, I stayed back to make sure the business my father started in his garage wasn't just a pipe dream. But things have a funny way of changing. Let me tell you when it all clicked for me that I was never going to be seen for what I truly was, the backbone of Wilson Plumbing. It was the night my dad handed the keys to the company truck, my truck, the one I'd been driving for years, the one I'd spent countless hours fixing up to my little brother, Travis. And get this, he handed it to him as an engagement gift. Yeah, you heard that right. Travis, the guy who's been working with us for only 5 years, has a knack for avoiding real work and forgets his phone every weekend. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love Travis, but he's the guy who shows up late, takes long lunches, and let's be real, has never been the one to solve the emergency calls at 2 a.m. in a blizzard. That was my job. But apparently, none of that mattered. He gets the shiny new truck as a gift, while I'm stuck in my 2010 rust bucket that's barely hanging on. For some context, my dad, Earl Wilson, started this plumbing business in his garage with nothing but a van and a toolbox. Over the years, he built it up with my help, expanding the fleet, getting more employees, and establishing a solid reputation in the community. People knew us. I worked my ass off for that reputation. I'm not exaggerating when I say I became the business. When a customer called at 3 a.m. because their pipes froze, guess who was there? Me. When someone needed their toilets fixed during the holiday rush, guess who was there? Again, me. I sacrificed my social life, weekends, and, honestly, my entire future to make sure the business ran smoothly. Travis, on the other hand, was still stuck in that "I'm only here because I have to be" mentality. It wasn't his fault, he was just never really into it the way I was. And that was fine. He had his own things going on. But the truck? The company truck? That should have been mine. My dad promised me time and time again that I was going to get the keys to that thing. It was supposed to be my reward for sticking it out all these years. But that night, the truck was his, and I was stuck watching it happen. And you know what really hurt? My dad just shrugged it off. He didn't even see the problem. It was like this was just another family moment, and everything I'd put into the company didn't even count. "Don't worry about it, Alex," Dad said, barely looking at me. "You'll be fine with your old truck. Travis needs to look professional now that he's taking on more clients." I couldn't even look at him. I stood there, the taste of disappointment thick in my mouth. How was it that Travis, who barely even showed up on time half the time, was the one getting the shiny new toy while I was left in the dust? I had worked my ass off for 15 years to make sure this company succeeded, and in that moment, I realized it was never going to be enough. It wasn't just about the truck. It was about how everything I'd done for this company was being dismissed. As I drove home that night in my beat-up truck, I felt like I was suffocating. The years of sacrifice, the missed milestones, the endless hours, and the promises that were never kept, they all hit me like a freight train. And that's when I knew I was done. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I grabbed my phone, opened up the job listings, and started scrolling through them. Something I'd never thought I'd do. But I had to. I called up Jack, a guy who had left Wilson Plumbing a few years ago to work for a competitor. I asked him a few casual questions about their business, just to get a feel for what they were offering. What he said next hit me like a punch to the gut. "Alex, with your skills and client relationships, you could write your own ticket anywhere in this county. Seriously, what's kept you at your dad's place all these years?" That's when it hit me. I'd been stuck in the idea of loyalty, stuck in the idea that family comes first. But I'd forgotten something important. I'd forgotten myself. I was holding on to a version of loyalty that wasn't doing anything for me anymore. I'd become so used to being undervalued that I didn't even know my own worth. Jack's words echoed in my mind as I spent the next few days documenting everything, every client, every system, every little thing that I was responsible for. I wasn't going to screw over the business. I wasn't going to leave them in the lurch, but I sure as hell wasn't going to leave without making sure I had something to fall back on. I put everything in order: client records, maintenance schedules, supplier info, everything I could do to make sure they couldn't come running back to me when things went south. Then came the hardest part: telling Dad. I'd been planning to stick it out and maybe wait for things to change. But after the truck incident, I knew that wasn't going to happen. I wrote up my 2-week notice, left it on his desk, and waited. The moment I handed that letter over, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just a resignation. It was my final step away from a place where I had been undervalued for far too long. The moment I handed in my resignation felt surreal. I had spent years dreaming of standing up for myself, but now that the moment was finally here, it didn't feel like some victorious Hollywood scene. It felt more like a weight being lifted off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized was there. But it didn't come without consequences that I didn't fully understand yet. Dad was stunned when he saw my 2-week notice sitting on his desk. The look on his face was a mix of disbelief and frustration. He didn't even bother to ask me why or what the new job offered. Instead, he scoffed and said, "You can't be serious, Alex. This is about the truck, isn't it?" I didn't flinch. "No, Dad, it's not about the truck. It's about all the years you promised me, things that never came through. The partnership, the ownership stake, the recognition. I'm done waiting." He leaned back in his chair and just stared at me for a long moment, probably trying to figure out if I was joking. But I wasn't joking. This wasn't some tantrum. This was a decision I had been putting off for way too long. I had put in the time, the effort, the sweat, and now I was just tired. Tired of being overlooked and dismissed. Tired of being the go-to guy when things went wrong, but never the one who got credit. And let's not even talk about Travis. My younger brother, Travis, had been a thorn in my side for years, and I'd let it slide. Maybe I was too hopeful or too loyal, but his behavior had reached new levels of irresponsibility that I could no longer ignore. I'm not just talking about his constant tardiness, or the fact that he didn't pull his weight on job sites. I'm talking about the way he was being treated like the golden child, while I was left in the dust. Travis wasn't the type to take things seriously. He was 28, but his attitude screamed like a teenager who had no intention of growing up. He'd show up to work late, half-ass his tasks, and still manage to get more praise than me. Dad was always quick to make excuses for him. He's still learning. He's got potential, Alex, you know that. Yet, the moment he came up with a half-baked idea, like expanding into commercial contracts, Dad was all over it, calling it innovative thinking. But when I proposed the same idea months earlier, it was brushed aside as too risky. The frustration had been building for years, but when I saw Travis smiling as he took my truck away as a gift from Dad, it was like the final straw had snapped. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just working for the company. I was working for their approval, and it would never come. No matter how many hours I put in or how hard I worked, I was always going to be the backup plan. The fall guy, the one who did the real work while Travis waltzed in and reaped the rewards without breaking a sweat. I left that night with a sense of finality. There was no going back. I was done. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions I wasn't prepared for. Mom was the first to call me. Of course, she wanted me to reconsider. She reminded me how important family businesses were, how this was my dad's legacy. She told me things would get better. But what she didn't understand was that I had already given up everything I had to make that business work. Everything. Meanwhile, Dad didn't seem to grasp the gravity of my decision. He sent me a text a few hours later that read, "This is a mistake, son. You're overreacting." Overreacting? I had spent 15 years of my life trying to prove my worth to a man who was more focused on appeasing his younger son than acknowledging my contributions. It wasn't overreacting. It was self-preservation. I spent the next couple of days gathering my thoughts and preparing for what was next. I had always been the responsible one, the one who carried the weight of the business. But now I was stepping into the unknown. The idea of finding a new job, a new purpose, felt like a fresh breath of air. I didn't realize I needed. Then came the phone call from Jack. Jack was the guy who had left Wilson Plumbing years ago. He was one of the best techs we'd ever had, but he'd gotten fed up with the way Dad ran things and bailed out. He had left for a competitor, and I had never really talked to him much since. but something about the way he spoke to me when I asked him about his new job made everything clearer. "Alex, what are you doing still working there?" he asked. "You've got the skills, the relationships, you could be running your own division by now. You could get paid what you deserve." I had never really thought about it that way. I'd always told myself that loyalty mattered. That family came first. But Jack's words hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd been enabling my own mistreatment by staying. I was stuck in this cycle of thinking that if I worked hard enough, eventually Dad would recognize me. But the truth was, he never would. He was too caught up in keeping Travis happy. I couldn't ignore the fact that I had given 15 years of my life to this business, and it wasn't even mine. I had helped build it, shaped it, made it what it was today, but it was never going to be my business. Travis was going to take over, and I was going to be stuck in the same place, always playing second fiddle. I called Jack back a few days later and asked if his company had any openings. The timing was perfect. Brighton Plumbing Services needed an experienced tech to manage their commercial division, and they were offering a salary that was nearly 40% higher than what I was making with Wilson Plumbing. I'd be making more, getting better benefits, and most importantly, I'd have room to grow professionally. I would finally have the opportunity to build something for myself, something I could be proud of. So, with a newfound sense of clarity, I did what I had to do. I didn't burn any bridges. I didn't act out of spite. I just left. And as I walked away from Wilson Plumbing for the last time, it felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself. I hadn't realized I'd lost, but leaving wasn't easy. I knew the decision would hurt my family, but it was the right thing to do. Sometimes, you have to step away from the familiar in order to see the bigger picture. And as I stared at the resignation letter on Dad's desk, I couldn't help but wonder if he finally realized what he had lost. The first few days after leaving Wilson Plumbing felt like I was walking around in a fog. It wasn't because I was unsure about my decision. No, I knew it was the right call. But stepping away from something that had been such a massive part of my life for so long, it left a weird kind of emptiness behind. The old truck that had been my constant companion for years, the late-night emergency calls, the tight-knit team I'd helped build, the customers who relied on us suddenly, all of that was behind me. It was hard to adjust to the idea that I wasn't Alex from Wilson Plumbing anymore. I was just Alex, the guy who had spent his whole adult life building a business that wasn't even his. And that was something I had to come to terms with. The job at Brighton Plumbing was a game changer. It wasn't just about the money, though. The pay raise was definitely a nice change. It was the respect, the appreciation, the professional growth I'd been craving for years. At Brighton, my ideas didn't get dismissed. They got heard. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in the right place. Kevin, the manager at Brighton, was everything my dad wasn't. He saw potential in me from the first day, and he treated me like a professional, not some overworked employee. When I suggested a better approach to how they handled commercial maintenance, Kevin didn't just nod politely and move on. He told me to turn it into a company-wide system. And then he gave me the resources to make it happen. It felt so validating. For years, I had felt like I was just the guy who showed up, fixed the pipes, and went home. But here I was trusted with real responsibility. Things were clicking into place. I wasn't just another worker, I was a part of something bigger. The more I worked at Brighton, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about leaving my family's business. It was about proving to myself that I had something valuable to offer beyond the role I had been stuck in. I spent hours making the new maintenance system better, refining the processes that would help the company expand, and improving customer satisfaction. Kevin even started bringing up the possibility of me managing a new location in the neighboring county. That idea, managing my own team, building my own thing, sounded like everything I'd ever wanted. But even as I thrived in my new role, the reality of what was happening to Wilson Plumbing hit me hard. The first few weeks without me felt like chaos for them. I had left behind a detailed binder with all the essential systems, key contacts, and instructions on how to handle the major clients. I did everything I could to make sure they wouldn't crash and burn, but it seemed like without me there to hold things together, everything started to fall apart. I wasn't exactly happy to see it happen, but part of me wasn't surprised. After all, I had spent years doing the work of two people, and Travis had never been able to handle the weight of the business. But now, with me gone, it was like the cracks in the foundation were becoming obvious. First, the scheduling system I had built started to unravel. Travis didn't know how to manage it. And the clients, well, they were used to me, not Travis. There were complaints, lots of them, missed appointments, double bookings. They couldn't keep up. And worst of all, the customers who had been loyal to Wilson Plumbing for years started to leave, one by one. I'd been the one who built those relationships. I had worked hard to make sure every client was happy, that they knew they could count on us, no matter the time of day or night. But now, they were feeling the difference. It was hard to ignore the texts that came in. They weren't from Dad or Travis. No, these came from the clients. "Hey, Alex, do you know what happened to my service appointment? We've been trying to reach your brother, but he's not answering." I didn't respond right away. I wasn't about to dive back in. I had made my choice, and I wasn't going to let myself be sucked back into that mess. But the messages kept coming. People the first had worked with for years, people I had helped, asking me where the hell I was. Then, the real disaster hit. It was about a month after I left. Travis had been put in charge of the quarterly maintenance for Riverside Medical Center, our biggest commercial client, the one that paid the big bucks. And of course, he messed it up. Badly. He forgot to shut off a main valve, which led to flooding in a storage area. The hospital immediately canceled their contract. That was a $180,000 annual loss for Wilson Plumbing. I could barely believe it when I heard the news. The company was reeling. It wasn't just the loss of revenue. It was the public embarrassment. The reputation that I had worked so hard to build was crumbling, and I couldn't help but feel like a part of me was going down with it. After all, I had built that reputation. I had been the one who handled the emergency calls, the one who made sure the job was done right. But none of that mattered now. The fallout was real. Travis didn't take it well. He started to crack under the pressure. I'd heard from one of the old technicians, Tom, that Travis had a complete meltdown in the office, throwing tools across the workshop and screaming about how Dad had thrown him into the deep end. He didn't know half of what I did, and now he was being expected to fill my shoes. Tom told me that, for a brief moment, Travis had admitted the truth. He wasn't ready for this. He didn't know how to manage things the way I did. I wasn't there to see it, but I could picture it perfectly. I could picture Travis standing there, surrounded by a mess he wasn't prepared for, realizing just how much I had carried. And honestly, part of me felt a little bit of satisfaction in knowing that he was getting a taste of the weight I had been carrying for all these years. But there was no joy in it. Seeing the company unravel wasn't some great revenge. It didn't feel like justice. It just felt sad. Then the calls started coming in, first from Dad, then from Travis, and eventually, even from Mom. They were desperate. They needed me back. But I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I'd given them enough of myself. Instead, I focused on my new life. I spent my days improving the maintenance system at Brighton, connecting with new clients, and even started building a small network of contractors. I was busy, but I was finally happy. It felt good not to have to rush through dinner with my family just to get back to work. It felt good to be able to turn off my phone at night and not worry about being on call. Still, part of me couldn't ignore the slow, steady collapse happening at Wilson Plumbing. The company I had spent so much of my life building was crumbling, and I had to wonder if my absence had sped up the process. But then again, maybe it was just a matter of time. The weeks passed, and with each one, my life continued to shift in ways I hadn't expected. The relief I felt leaving Wilson Plumbing was something I couldn't quite describe, not because I had no emotional attachment, but because I had lived in the shadow of that business for so long, I didn't even realize how suffocating it had become. At Brighton Plumbing, I wasn't just a tech, I was part of a team that valued my input. Kevin, the manager, didn't just treat me like a tool to fix pipes. He treated me like an equal. The work was still demanding, but it felt different better. The pace was more controlled. The clients were still high stakes, but now I had the resources and respect to do the job right. There was a sense of pride in the work that I hadn't felt in years. Every morning, I woke up excited to go to work, not because I was finally getting paid what I was worth, though that was part of it, But because I was finally getting the kind of recognition I had spent years hoping for, I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the guy who had to bend over backward to make everything run smoothly, only to be ignored. I was valued, but even with all the professional satisfaction, there was still a part of me that couldn't shake the guilt. Not guilt for leaving, but guilt for how things were turning out back at Wilson Plumbing. Despite everything, despite all the broken promises and all the frustrations, it was still my family. And seeing the company falter like this, knowing I had played a huge role in building it up, made it hard to stay indifferent. I kept up with what was happening back home. I didn't seek out the updates. Sometimes I wished I could just forget it, but the texts came. My old customers started reaching out. It was a weird feeling, hearing from people I had built relationships with for years, people who trusted me to fix their problems. They all wanted to know why I wasn't there anymore. Some asked if I was coming back. Others just expressed concern. The worst part was hearing how everything was falling apart. Customers were leaving. Travis was struggling to manage the schedule, and I wasn't sure if Dad was even still trying to hold it together. One day, I got a message from Tom, one of the old texts, that confirmed my worst fears. The company was on the brink of collapse. They had lost some of their biggest commercial accounts, and their reputation was taking a hit. The phone was ringing off the hook with complaints. I hated that I had this knowledge. I hated that I felt responsible. I wasn't the one running things anymore, but part of me couldn't help but feel like I had left them in the lurch. It wasn't like I was a hero, and I didn't want to be. I didn't want to get dragged back into the same toxic mess that had drained me for so long. But the guilt lingered like a shadow that wouldn't go away. Still, I kept my distance. I had made the right decision. I had to remind myself of that. One day, a little over a month after I left, I got a call from Dad. He was sounding more worn out than I had ever heard him. Gone was the fatherly confidence, the strength he usually had. Instead, there was a defeated edge to his voice. He wanted to meet up. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop, halfway between his house and mine. To be honest, I wasn't sure what I was walking into. Was he going to beg me to come back? Would he try to convince me that everything could be fixed, that it wasn't too late? Honestly, I had no idea. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it, but I owed him at least a face-to-face conversation. When I walked in, I saw him immediately. He looked different. His usually immaculate hair was thinning and looked unkempt. He had bags under his eyes that hadn't been there before. The confident businessman, the man who had built Wilson Plumbing from the ground up, looked like a man on the edge. Travis was there too. He looked even worse than Dad. He was hunched over, his usual cocky demeanor gone. His eyes were red, like he hadn't slept in days. I hadn't seen Travis this vulnerable since we were kids. Dad didn't waste time. He slid a folder across the table to me. "We need your help, Alex," he said, his voice shaky. "The business it's in serious trouble. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up." I opened the folder and saw a pile of financial reports, invoices, and contracts documents that showed the magnitude of the situation. The company's revenue had dropped by 60%. They had laid off a third of their staff. The bank was threatening to call in the business loan, and they had already sold off 3 of their trucks just to cover basic expenses. It was a financial nightmare. "Dad, I didn't know it was this bad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It was hard to wrap my head around. This was the business I had worked my entire adult life to build, and now it was on the brink of destruction. Travis finally spoke up. "I'm not ready for this, Alex. I thought I could handle it, but I don't know how to run this business the way you did. I don't know what I'm doing." There was a vulnerability in his voice that I had never heard before. It hit me hard. For years, Travis had coasted on my work, taking credit for things he didn't deserve. And now here he was, admitting that he wasn't prepared for the responsibility. That moment. It was the first time in a long time I felt something close to empathy for him. Dad pushed the folder closer to me. "We made a lot of mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes. I didn't realize how much you were doing, Alex. I need your help." I paused. I wasn't ready to jump back in. I had my own life now, my own future to think about. And part of me wanted to walk away and let them deal with the consequences of their decisions. They had let me walk out the door without a second thought, after all. Why should I come back now? But then I thought about it. I thought about the years I had invested in that business. The sweat, the hours, the moments of stress and triumph. And for a second, I considered it. Maybe I could come back and help them rebuild. Maybe I could step in, take over the operations, and try to turn things around. But then, as quickly as the thought came, it left. I wasn't going to sacrifice myself again. I had already given enough. I had already done more than my share. I looked at Dad and Travis and made my decision. I can't come back, Dad, I said, my voice steady. I've moved on. I found a place where my skills are valued, where I'm treated with respect. But if you want to rebuild, you're going to have to do it without me. I'm not going to be your backup plan anymore. It was a hard thing to say, but it felt like the truth. It felt like the right choice. It's funny how things change when you finally stop trying to please everyone else. I think about that a lot now, especially when I look back at how I spent so many years chasing approval. I kept thinking that if I worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, eventually I'd be recognized. But the reality hit me hard. It wasn't about recognition at all. It was about respect, and that's something you can't earn just by working yourself into the ground. It's something that has to be given willingly, and I learned the hard way that some people just aren't willing to give it. Leaving Wilson Plumbing was the hardest thing I'd ever done, and yet, walking away was also the best decision I'd ever made. It's not that I didn't love what I did. I loved plumbing. I loved solving problems, making systems work smoothly, and helping people when they were in a jam. What I didn't love was how the family business had turned into a place where only one person mattered, the one who got the spotlight. My father and brother were always at the top, with me down in the trenches, never getting my due. The fallout from my departure continued to affect Wilson Plumbing, but as the weeks passed, it became easier to push aside the guilt and focus on my new life. At Brighton Plumbing, I was building something better, something I could truly be proud of. The pace was faster, the work was challenging, and most importantly, I was valued. I finally had the kind of support I needed to do my job well. Kevin, the manager, saw the potential in me right away. He didn't just throw me into a role and expect me to sink or swim like my father had. No, Kevin took the time to mentor me, to show me the ropes in ways that actually made sense. When I suggested revamping the scheduling system to improve efficiency, he didn't just nod and file it away, he actually asked me to make it happen and gave me the resources to do it. That was something I had never experienced before. And it wasn't just about the technical work, it was the respect I received as a professional. Kevin asked for my opinion in meetings. He trusted my judgment on client relationships. It was a sharp contrast to my life back at Wilson Plumbing, where my opinions were often dismissed or ignored. At Brighton, I wasn't just a cog in the machine. I was part of the team. But as much as I loved my new job, there were days when I still couldn't help but check in on the family business. I tried to distance myself, tried to stop caring, but I couldn't help it. I kept hearing things from old clients. I kept getting texts from people who remembered me fondly, asking about the status of their old service requests, and I kept hearing rumors of how bad things were getting. The first big blow came when I found out Riverside Medical Center had dropped Wilson Plumbing after Travis botched a major maintenance job. The hospital was one of our biggest accounts, and losing it was a massive blow. It wasn't just the money, it was the reputation. That was the kind of client that brought in referrals, the kind that got you noticed in the business community. Travis, the guy who had always skated by with half the work and full credit, was now drowning. His mistakes were piling up, and Dad was too overwhelmed to step in and help. I heard through the grapevine that Travis had completely lost his cool in the office after the Riverside incident. He was yelling at Dad, blaming him for setting him up to fail. And honestly, I didn't blame him. Travis had never been ready for the responsibility that was being thrust on him. He'd coasted for too long, thinking the business would always run on autopilot. But the truth was, it relied on people like me, the ones who actually knew how things worked. I wasn't there to witness the fallout, but I could imagine it perfectly. Dad had always been the one to hold everything together, but now he was barely holding on himself. The business he had built with his own hands was slipping through his fingers, and he knew it. I could see the desperation in his voice when he called me after the Riverside disaster. I don't know what to do, Alex. The business is on the brink. I don't know if we can save it without you. It was the same conversation we'd had before, only now, it wasn't a plea for help, it was an acknowledgement that everything had fallen apart. I could feel the weight of the years of unspoken tension between us, the years of promises broken and expectations that were never met. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him, but then I remembered how many times I'd been overlooked, how many times I had been sidelined. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said, my voice firm, "but I've moved on. I'm not coming back. You're going to have to figure this out on your own." It felt like the right thing to say, but there was still a part of me that felt guilty. Guilt that I couldn't be the hero. Guilt that I couldn't come back and save the day like I'd done so many times before. But I couldn't let that guilt control me. I had done everything I could for that business. I had given my time, my energy, and my heart, and it had never been enough. I had to remind myself of that. And then came the offer that changed everything. A few weeks after that conversation with Dad, Kevin at Brighton called me into his office. "I've been thinking," he said. "We're opening a second location, and I want you to run it." At first, I thought he was joking, but when I saw the seriousness in his eyes, I realized he wasn't. This was the opportunity I had been waiting for, the chance to build something from the ground up, to create my own legacy instead of just being part of someone else's. I accepted, of course. It was a dream come true. The idea of running my own team, building my own client base, making the decisions, I couldn't pass that up. I dove in head first. The new location was in a neighboring county, and there was a lot of work to do. It was challenging, but it was exactly what I wanted. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control of my future. I had built a career for myself, not because of family loyalty or obligation, but because of my skills, my experience, and the hard work I'd put in. At the same time, Wilson Plumbing was struggling to stay afloat. I didn't hear much from Dad or Travis anymore. The occasional message, a reminder of how bad things were getting, but nothing more. I couldn't bring myself to reach out either. Part of me felt like I should at least check in on them, but the other part, the part that had been burned too many times, knew better. Then came the final twist. A few months after I had taken control of the new location, I received a message from an old supplier who worked with both Brighton and Wilson Plumbing. They'd told me that Wilson Plumbing had sold off its remaining trucks, laid off most of its staff, and was struggling to even meet the basic demands of its remaining clients. "Did you hear?" The supplier texted me. "Your dad's got the business on the market. He's looking to sell." I wasn't sure how to feel. On one hand, I wasn't surprised. The business had been sinking for a while, and it seemed like Dad had finally accepted the inevitable. But on the other hand, there was a part of me that felt like I should be there. I should be helping. After everything we had been through, part of me still felt a pull to help them. But that wasn't my role anymore. It's funny how time changes everything. There was a time, not too long ago, when I felt like I was stuck in an endless loop of disappointment. My dad and my brother's expectations of me, my own need to prove myself to them, it was all so suffocating. But the more I've settled into this new life, the more I've realized how much weight I was carrying without even knowing it. Now, I wake up every day with purpose and a sense of pride I hadn't known in years. At Brighton Plumbing, my new role as manager of the second location wasn't just a promotion, it was my chance to finally carve out my own space, my own legacy. Kevin, the manager who had recognized my value from the very start, wasn't just handing me responsibility. He was showing me how to lead, how to trust my instincts, and how to make decisions without the constant fear of failure that had plagued me at Wilson Plumbing. Every day, I was learning, growing, and becoming a better version of myself. It was everything I had been missing. I threw myself into the job. I built a team, developed relationships with local businesses, and implemented systems that made the entire operation more efficient. And it worked. Within a few months, we were hitting numbers I hadn't even dreamed of. The company's reputation grew stronger, and I felt like I was finally creating something that was truly mine. But as my career flourished, I couldn't completely shut off the thoughts of what was happening to Wilson Plumbing. I didn't check in on Dad or Travis anymore. Those texts and calls had stopped coming. I'd moved on, but the guilt still lingered, like a quiet hum in the background of my thoughts. Part of me still felt the weight of that business. I had given so much to it, and despite everything, a piece of me still wanted to help. It wasn't even about revenge, it was about trying to fix something that I had spent so many years building. Then, just when I thought I was truly moving forward, I got a message from my old supplier. It had been months since I'd heard anything from Wilson Plumbing, and when I saw his name pop up, I felt a knot form in my stomach. "Alex," he started, "I heard your dad's trying to sell Wilson Plumbing. He's finally throwing in the towel." I read the message again as if somehow the words would change. They didn't. My father, the man who had built this business from the ground up, was finally ready to let go. It wasn't just that the company was failing, it was that he was admitting defeat. For a moment, I just sat there. It felt like a punch to the gut. On one hand, I wasn't surprised. I had known for a while that it was only a matter of time before Wilson Plumbing came crashing down. But hearing it, seeing it confirmed, brought a mix of emotions. There was sadness. There was relief. There was even a little bit of anger. And above all, there was a lingering sense of guilt. I had been a part of that business for so long, and now it was gone. I didn't want to feel guilty. I knew I had made the right decision by leaving. But when you've invested so much of your life into something, it's hard to shake the feeling that maybe you could have done more, tried harder, or somehow saved it. But that wasn't my responsibility anymore. I had already given them everything. I had sacrificed my time, my health, and my future for a company that never saw my worth. And no matter how hard I worked, it was never enough. It was time to let go. And for the first time, I realized that the best thing I could do for myself and for my future was to stop carrying that weight. A few days later, I got another call. This time, it was from Travis. His voice was shaky, almost desperate. "Alex, I need your help," he said. "Dad's not doing well. The business is in bad shape. I don't know how to fix it." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to jump back in, to fix it all and make everything right. But I couldn't. I had already walked away once, and I wasn't going back. I had learned that sometimes walking away is the only way forward. "I can't help you, Travis," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I've moved on. I've built something for myself, and I'm not going back to fix what I've already left behind. You need to figure this out on your own." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could feel the weight of the silence between us, and then Travis spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "I get it. I've messed up, but I thought maybe you could show me how to fix things." "I'm not ready for this, Alex. I never was." Those words coming from him hit me harder than I expected. Travis had always been the golden child, the one who coasted through life without ever really taking responsibility. But now, here he was, admitting the truth, he wasn't ready. And the reality was, he might never have been ready. It wasn't my job to fix him. It wasn't my responsibility to save Wilson Plumbing. I had already given everything I could to that place, and it had never been enough. But Travis was different now. He was trying, and I could see that. "You're right, Travis," I said after a moment. "You weren't ready. But now, you've got to learn. And I can't do that for you. I can't go back to a place that doesn't value me, doesn't see what I've done. You have to figure this out for yourself. I believe you can, but you've got to put in the work." I could hear the crack in his voice as he said, "I will. I'll figure it out." And that was it. That was the moment when I realized that walking away didn't mean abandoning them. It didn't mean I didn't care. It just meant that I had to take care of myself first. I had to stop letting their failures define my future. It wasn't easy, but in a way, it was freeing. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first left. I had built something new. I had built it on my terms, and I wasn't going to let the past hold me back any longer. Weeks later, I found myself looking at a new opportunity. Kevin had been talking about expanding the Brighton plumbing branch into new territories, and now he was offering me the chance to run the expansion in an even bigger market. It was exactly what I needed: a fresh start, another challenge to tackle. The thought of running a larger branch, of finally taking full control, was exhilarating. It was everything I had wanted. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that this was my future. Not Wilson Plumbing. Not my dad or Travis. It was mine. As I looked out the window of my office at Brighton Plumbing, I realized something important. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in watching others fail, it's in succeeding so completely that your absence is felt as a loss. That's when I finally let go. Story 2. When I announced my resignation, Emily scoffed at me, and I retaliated by keeping my eyes steady and silent. We had discussed the company's desire to reduce labor expenditures, namely targeting individuals who were allegedly abusing overtime pay. A week later, Tom also appeared to enjoy the idea of cutting costs. I was getting calls from the firm on my phone. The president responded with a pointed question, "Who are you exactly?" At the president's query, I couldn't help but laugh. I responded by introducing myself as Lily Johnson, a 59-year-old worker who has been with the company for 37 years since graduating from college. I described our organization's function in offering administrative services, with a focus on tax-related clerical work for busy company presidents. I am happy to oversee 45 clients, a duty that had been too much to do even with a part-time helper. Despite the difficulties, I was unable to display any signs of weakness. Our clients had been with us for a long time, and their struggles strengthened my resolve. I was sitting in front of my computer today, thinking about Tom and Emily's constant pestering. Tom, the head of the tax department and 7 years my younger, had altered his attitude significantly. I was promoted 3 months ago. Every conversation became difficult as his formerly kind tone gave way to complaints and contempt. He was unaffected by my counterattack, telling me to go to the handbook for direction and cautioning me against taking needless measures. Tom's assistant Emily participated in the abuse, making fun of my rank and file position and critiquing my effectiveness. I vowed to carry out my usual responsibilities, even though I was the first to turn down a promotion to department head something Tom and Emily were unaware of. They continued to torment me, and Tom said I was becoming worse over time, referring to it as a waste. Emily agreed with him, stating that the performance of the whole tax department was being negatively impacted by my continual overtime. Tom suddenly left a month's worth of customer paperwork on my desk to be filed before the end of the month after work, which is what recently caused me to work extra. I looked over the files in front of me, my face going pale. "All of them have due dates this month, correct?" I said in bewilderment. But before I realized how serious the issue was, Tom had already packed up his desk and shown little interest in listening to my worries. "I'm leaving." "Take care of that," he said nonchalantly as he hurried out of the office, leaving me with a mountain of pressing work. Emily did the same, laughing mockingly to make matters worse. As I opened the client files strewn across my desk, I let out a deep sigh, overcome by the ridiculousness of the situation. I was disappointed to learn that Emily was initially in charge of some of the files. I had a deep-seated understanding of why Tom had been harassing me so persistently. They wanted me out of here as soon as possible. Other tax department employees favored me over Tom because of my vast expertise and in-depth understanding of taxes. Tom was avoided by everyone save Emily because of his distant manner and ugly features. Emily's closeness to him appeared to be calculated, motivated by Tom's inclination for younger female workers. I felt cold because of how superficial their thinking was. There was more to Emily's harassment than a personal grudge. She wanted to win over Tom, who was assessing the work of the tax department. I had to prepare tax declarations for my designated firms and handle the statements in spite of these difficulties. The workload for today appeared to be far from finished, but claiming overtime would just make Tom and Emily unhappy, so I was forced to accept the possibility of working unpaid overtime. Then, without warning, I was summoned to the president's office. The untimely sickness of the prior president had lately resulted in a change of leadership for our organization. Our firm was unfamiliar to the new president, who was the son of the previous president. I walked inside the office. I saw Emily and Tom grinning in an unflattering way. The president unleashed a bombshell in a stressful situation. "By the end of this month, Lily will require your resignation." As I sought clarity, my thoughts were racing. It seems that Tom and Emily accused me of overcharging for overtime, pointing out that I had worked more than 80 hours, while others had only worked about 15. Unaware of the actual situation, the president appeared impressed by Emily and Tom. No overtime. I was struck by the situation's realism. Doing Tom and Emily's task resulted in the exorbitant overtime, but disclosing Tom's instructions runs the danger of coming out as my own incapacity to efficiently manage my time. I stated that I hadn't overbilled for overtime, but found it difficult to complete my responsibilities during regular business hours. With a heavy sigh, the president acknowledged the lack of proof to further investigate the situation while expressing uncertainty. He was adamant, however, that they couldn't keep someone working so slowly. The president proposed that I quit, and it appeared that he had already made up his mind. I was told to quit the firm I had worked for 37 years. I started to feel tired. Even though I worked hard, Tom and Emily's extra labor was not recognized. I acknowledged that I had previously informed the president of my plan to step down at the end of the month. Tom and Emily's obscene smiles conveyed joy as I looked at them. Emily sneered at me as she left the president's office, thanking me cynically for resigning. I stared silently in response. Tom, who agreed with him that labor expenses should be reduced, treated me with the same contempt and accused me of abusing overtime compensation. As I created paperwork for each of my clients, I thought about the handover procedure while listening to their happy chat. I made sure everyone I could meet in person had appropriate farewells and appointments. A meeting with the president could not be arranged. To let them know about my succession, I turned to letters. A week after resigning, I was lounging around the house when my cell phone called. I paused when I saw the company's call, having finished the social insurance process already. However, I picked up the phone grudgingly after receiving repeated calls from the business, as well as Tom and Emily's personal mobiles. "Who are you, exactly?" the president said urgently. "Just an unemployed lady who resigned from the company," was my sarcastic response. "Nothing more." The president responded by quickly outlining the disarray that has existed since my departure. 49 calls to halt business transactions. He begged me to come back now. His tone betrayed a sense of fear. I got out of my chair reluctantly and walked back to the workplace. When I got there, Emily and Tom were already there. The tired eyes on their faces are accentuated by dark and pale circles. I asked what was going on since I was shocked by how drastically they had changed. Tom gave me a fierce look and told me, "We've received a ton of calls since you left asking us to halt transactions from both potential businesses and your clients. Our intention was to launch. What did you do?" Emily confirmed the notion and expressed disappointment that I would use deceitful methods. The toll handling cancellations were indicated by their gaunt appearance. However, I hadn't deceived the customers. Given that cancellations are inevitable, I had a suspicion as to why the transactions were halted. I muttered my ideas out loud, but Tom accused me directly, saying I had planned something. He forcibly escorted me to the president's office and demanded that I go there right away. When Tom and Emily and I walked into the president's office, the president looked me in the eyes. Declared President Tom, I carried her with a sense of command, and Emily quickly followed. The president asked me about the sudden stop in transactions following my departure, but I ignored their accusatory tone. After inhaling deeply, I clarified that our clients don't require our assistance with tax management. There are tax accounting companies that provide services at a lower cost. I'm the reason they stay with us. Emily teased me, and Tom retaliated by doubting my value to the company and my own self-worth. Unfazed, I went into further detail about my special method and provided our clients with customized tax-saving techniques that worked. Tom rejected it as ineffective, claiming that their manual processes were more useful. The president let out a long sigh as he realized how fundamentally different our methods were. He spoke seriously, as if he were hinting at an important discovery or choice to come. My father, the former president, called me out of the blue. As it happens, a few customers who had halted transactions went straight to Dad to bargain on my behalf. Clients going to such lengths for me was not something I had expected. Dad stressed that my contributions were the reason the tax department prospered. In addition to effectively managing my clients, I also assisted my colleagues' clients by having knowledge that even Tom lacked. Dad disclosed that if I hadn't declined the promotion, I would have held a higher position than a department head by now. The current president expressed regret with a pained expression. Emily appeared shocked, probably grappling with the idea that I could have been her superior. The president asked if I would think about rescinding my resignation and expressed regret for forcing me to do so in the first place. Dad said that I was essential to the business. While I appreciated the change in the president's perspective, I hesitated to accept. Tom interrupted our conversation, visibly upset, and protested the president's decision. Questioning why I was chosen over him, Emily echoed his sentiments, praising Tom's leadership and expressing disbelief at the preference for me. The president then sternly addressed them, revealing that since my resignation, numerous complaints had been received from the tax department, suggesting they have been shifting their workload onto others. Tom's face turned pale as the president exposed the fact that he had been pushing the preparation of client declaration forms onto subordinates, including Emily's work for multiple clients. The president pointed out the irony, considering Tom had accused me of being a salary thief. Observing Tom and Emily's pale expressions, the president continued by revealing an alleged leak about their romantic involvement. Tom struggled to defend himself, claiming he was merely mentoring Emily as her superior. However, the president produced receipts from the accounting department indicating dining expenses filed by Tom. Confronted with evidence, Tom, sweating profusely, was unable to provide a convincing explanation. Emily, too, turned ghostly pale as the president accused them of neglecting their duties, inflating expense claims, and violating company policy by having an affair in the office while being married. In a calm and straightforward manner, the president declared the termination of their employment effective immediately. Tom and Emily tried to resist, promising to retract the receipt claims and pleading for their jobs. "I have a family," Tom desperately pleaded, attempting to reverse his termination. Emily echoed his sentiments, tearfully expressing her fear of being fired. She promised to apologize to me and others for burdening them with work. Realizing the gravity of the situation involving neglect of duties and an affair with a supervisor concerned about her reputation, she implored for a second chance. Sensing their desperation, I offered advice. "Why don't you stop resisting? It's undignified," I suggested. Tom glared at me, retorting, "Shut up. Why would a single person like you understand?" I sighed, reminding him. "Tom, you were the one who got me fired. It's just karma. You get what you give. Why don't you take some responsibility and reflect a bit?" Frustrated, Tom looked away while Emily bit her lip in distress, aware of more details about their misconduct. I turned to the president, asking with a smile if I should share them. Tom and Emily frantically tried to stop me. Fearing further exposure, I issued an ultimatum warning them that wrongdoings would eventually come to light, urging them to face reality before it worsened. At my words, both Tom and Emily collapsed to their knees, and the president decided to fire them on the spot. Later, I revealed more about their misdeeds, including Tom faking business trips to spend days with Emily and their insidious tactics of harassing disliked employees into quitting. Despite my attempts to help those employees, Tom and Emily's strategies were relentless. They repeatedly reprimanded and pressured employees out of my sight, often assigning sudden tasks with tight deadlines. The resigned employees had initially asked me to keep quiet, but since they were now happily working elsewhere, I decided it was time to speak up. The president, furious at my revelations, expressed anger about cutting Tom and Emily's final salary. He planned to thoroughly investigate past inflated expense claims. Tom, with tears in his eyes, thanked the president not to cut his salary, fearing the impact on his family. As the truth unraveled, Tom's affair with Emily came to light, leading to Tom's divorce. The two now face claims for compensation in the divorce lawsuit, marking the consequential aftermath of their actions. I became aware of the situation when Tom reached out to me, seeking assistance in persuading the president to reconsider their firing. Emily and Tom found themselves in dire straits. Despite their efforts, they struggled to secure new jobs in the tax industry. The industry's close-knit nature meant that word of their misdeeds spread rapidly, making potential employers hesitant to hire them. Desperate for income to cover divorce, compensation, and living expenses, they resorted to day labor at construction sites, a stark departure from their previous office roles. Emily would often call me in tears, pleading for help. "Lily, please help. I only wanted a better life and I never truly liked Tom, she'd cry. However, I couldn't ignore the fact that their predicament was a consequence of their own actions. Many, including myself, had been impacted by their behavior. I reminded Emily that the consequences were a result of her choices. You can't unring a bell, I told her firmly. Facing hardships was the consequence of her decisions. Emily's despair echoed through her protests. Despite her regrets, the outcome remained unchanged. As for me, I chose to distance myself from the chaos of the corporate world. Despite the president's pleas for my return, I declined. Once told to resign, I had no desire to return. Instead, I found solace in assisting at a friend's tax office, supplementing my income and enjoying a more relaxed lifestyle. In the future, I entertained the idea of starting my own office, where I could serve my clients without the constraints of corporate bureaucracy. In my own space, I could fully dedicate myself to my clients' needs. As a tax accountant, I aspire to be on equal footing with my clients, providing service without superiority. This marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one filled with excitement and opportunities to pursue what truly mattered to me. My second life had just begun, and I eagerly anticipated the journey ahead. Story 3. My stepfather said that after controlling everyone, I was unstable and that we could no longer have him live here. That evening, I departed. They were sent with eviction papers a week later. Like most individuals my age, I am 19 years old and still trying to figure things out. The distinction is that since I was a little child, I have been the one in charge. I was 7 years old when my father passed away. I no longer had the luxury of being a youngster. Her name is Sally, Mom. For years, she was all I had. We were the only ones against the world. We had this rhythm. Despite our imperfections, we worked as a team. I can recall her calling me her little guy and ruffling my hair, something I secretly adored but seemed to despise. It seems as though those recollections are now part of someone else's life. When Tom entered the picture, everything was different. Tom appeared okay at first. He was kind to me, smooth and engaging. When I initially encountered him, however, I eventually came to the conclusion that he wasn't who he claimed to be. I could see through his selfishness and manipulation, but my mother was totally on board. The only person who could love her, she told herself, was him, so she had to keep him. As time went on, I observed her ignoring his attempts to manipulate us more and more. He was a triangulation expert. He would reportedly tell his mother how worried he was about my attitude issue or how withdrawn I appeared when I wasn't around. I would then be caught completely off guard when my mother brought up these issues with me. What attitude issue? Sincerely perplexed, I would inquire. Tom and I haven't even chatted much this week. However, the doubt had already been sown in her head. Even if Tom's strategies were still hidden from everyone else, they became increasingly clear to me over time. After offering to pick me up from school, he would get together and softly forget about it until I had been waiting for an hour. I would arrive home exhausted and irritated. He and Mom would be there, saying that I must have confused the times. Lately, Chris has become incredibly forgetful. With that worried expression, he could suggest that we get him evaluated for ADHD. And my gut would clench up when my mother would look at me with this mix of disappointment and fear. Seeing how he took advantage of my mother was the hardest part. In a quiet manner, Sally had always been powerful. Despite her internal disintegration, she managed to keep things together after her father passed away. However, Tom was well aware of how to play on her fears. For the tiniest things, he would give her praise. "Sally, you're such a talented chef. I have never encountered a woman who could elevate hamburger helper to the level of a gourmet, therefore becoming reliant on his admiration." He would then abruptly stop praising her, leaving her to try to figure out what she had done wrong. "I adore you, Sally, and you know it." When she asked him anything, he would respond. "Sometimes, though, you're simply too sensitive. I didn't intend that at all." Traditional gaslighting. Mom was too caught up in his web to notice what was going on, but I'd seen it enough times to know what it was. Next up was Lindsay, Tom's ex-girlfriend's kid. About a year after Tom and Mom's 16th wedding, she moved in with us. She was everything. I wasn't a loud, demanding, and egotistical person. Tom would treat her like a fragile princess who needed to be protected. yet she would have tantrums at the smallest discomfort. Tom was deliberate in his efforts to turn everyone against me. My mother was his first, followed by Lindsay, my neighbors, and other relatives. In this patchwork narrative, he would relate slightly different versions of the same tales to various people, portraying me as more and more unhappy and unappreciative of our neighbor. I stayed out too late and caused trouble. I was going through a period and causing my poor mother a lot of sorrow, according to my mom's sister. It felt like I was living in a warped other universe by the time I was 18. My true identity was unrelated to the narrative that was widely accepted about me. I continued to work part-time at the neighborhood grocery shop, attend honors classes, and had never even had a detention. However, in Tom's story, I was this unruly, maybe harmful figure in the house. One Thursday night was the tipping moment. We were eating dinner, one of Tom's required family meals, during which he would question me about my day and hardly allow me to speak. A knife might easily cut through the strain. Then Lindsay dropped her bomb with this sly little grin. She murmured pleasantly, "Dad." Earlier, Chris made me feel quite uneasy. Earlier that day, I almost choked on my water. When everyone else had left the kitchen, Lindsay had cornered me. She had rubbed herself against me and said in a whisper that it wouldn't be so strange if something occurred between us because we aren't actually related. It was eerie and repulsive. I firmly instructed her to back off after pushing her away not too hard, but enough to make room. Like she always did when she didn't get her way, she'd slammed doors and stormed off. Now, however, as she sat at supper, she was telling it in a totally different way. It had been me who had made the unsuitable recommendations. I was caught up in her deception, and I could see by the expression in Tom's eyes that he had been anticipating this very moment. With practiced worry, Tom turned to my mother and whispered, "Listen, he is now 18. He is a burden. He cannot continue to reside here." Her voice was faint as she answered, "I don't know, Mom. Perhaps it's time for those words to physically strike me." In fact, my own mother, whom I had supported throughout her worst moments following the death of my father, was thinking about evicting me on the basis of a flagrant lie. She refused to even meet my gaze. My legs trembled as I got to my feet. "Really? Will you really simply let him do this?" I questioned her. I learned all I needed to know from the stillness that ensued. It wasn't me that she had chosen. I packed my stuff that evening. My laptop, 2 suitcases of clothing, and the few pictures of my father that I still had that Tom hadn't lost. I had no strategy, only the urgent desire to leave that poisonous setting before I was totally engrossed in Tom's warped world. I gave my dad's brother, Uncle Jack, a call. We were not very close. By informing my mother that Jack was a negative influence who contributed to my attitude issues, Tom had ensured that. However, he was the only person that sprang to mind who may be able to relate. Without hesitation, he picked me up and didn't even ask for my details till we were at his flat securely. However, Tom persisted in his manipulation even after I had physically fled. In a matter of days, he was circulating tales across the community. He accused me of stealing money from certain people. He suggested to others that I was violent. He even got in touch with my employer and told my boss that he was worried about my dependability, almost costing me my job. He seemed to find it unbearable that I had gotten away from him. He therefore intended to ruin whatever independent life I may create. He spread the falsehood that I was unstable, dangerous, and that I had left my poor mother, who had done everything for me, by getting in touch with acquaintances, old family, and even my high school counselor. Some individuals took him at face value. When I was younger, my neighbor used to offer me cookies, but now she avoids me by crossing the street. Suddenly, my friend's parents didn't want him to spend time with me. Even my own grandparents, who are my mom's parents, sent me formal letters urging me to respect my mother and give Tom a chance. Update the ones. There were times when I was unsure about my identity. Was it me who was the issue? Was I really the aggressive, disrespectful, self-centered child he had persuaded everyone I was? Notwithstanding my repeated assurances that it wasn't true. Like some invasive plant that would not go away, his words continued to infiltrate my mind. Then came the call that made all the difference. My phone vibrated in my pocket as I was working in the organic area of the grocery store, stacking veggies. I sensed something was wrong since Uncle Jack didn't call very often when I was working. I hurried to the rear room to respond. "Come home as soon as your shift ends, Chris," he ordered in an uncharacteristically tight voice. Something has to be seen by you. My thoughts raced through ideas for the remainder of my shift, almost toppling a melon display. Mom, has something happened? Had Tom intensified his efforts to discredit me? My stomach was in knots by the time I turned into Uncle Jack's driveway. Jack had an old leather folder open in front of him as he waited for me at the kitchen table. There was something about his countenance when I went in, and he glanced up. I had trouble reading. Anger, incredulity, and what appeared to be victory mixed together. He pushed the folder in my direction and said, "Sit down, kid. I discovered something that ought to have been sent to you a long time ago while organizing some of my old files." Pulling the battered folder closer, I sat. It included a pile of legal papers, the type with official signatures and seals at the bottom. As I began reading the legalese, the paper seemed heavy in my hands. It then swam before my eyes until I saw a familiar address or home address, followed by my name. "What is this?" Even though I already knew, I asked. As I scanned the document, a gradual realization came to me. Jack continued, "Your father's will," in a calmer tone. "Chris, your dad left you the home. Not to you directly, and not to Sally. He put it in a trust that you would take over when you were 18. After your dad passed away, he trailed off, wiping his cheeks. I was meant to be the executor. As time went on, I just stopped bringing up the matter since Sally was so broken. I figured she was aware that she was keeping it for you till you reached adulthood." With my father's signature at the bottom, I gazed at the document. All of a sudden, the only thing. "I own the house where my mom and Tom currently reside. All this time," Jack gave a sad nod. "Yes, legally. Since 4 months ago, when you turned 18, you have owned that house. Not your mother, not Tom, you." I felt dizzy, as if I would faint, throw up, or do both. I was more than simply a child being kicked out of their house. The true owner was me, being coerced and evicted from my own land. Tom had been making changes to a house that wasn't even his, and he had completely eliminated my dad's presence. Is Mom aware? Even though I believe I already knew the answer, I was able to ask at last. Jack's face grew serious. She must. These records also contain her name. She signed as a witness, and I had already brought it up to her years before to Tom's involvement. "We'll work it out when the time comes," she dismissed it. I had trouble sleeping that night. I couldn't stop seeing Tom walking around my dad's house. By destroying our tree, throwing away my dad's belongings, and acting as though he owned the place, my house led my mother to believe that I was the intruder when, in reality, he was the one who didn't belong. By morning, my rage had given way to an odd serenity. I had watched helplessly for months as Tom methodically destroyed my life. Now, however, I had leverage now. I knew the truth. The law was also on my side. Over breakfast, I talked to Jack and explained my intentions. He listened without interjecting, and when I was done, he slowly nodded. "It won't be simple," he said. "Tom is not going to be quiet. What about your mother? This might be the last time you two spend time together. Are you ready for that?" Was I? I thought about all the times Mom had stood by silently while Tom belittled me all the time. She'd chosen his version of events over mine. The way she'd hesitated at the dinner table when Lindsay lied about me, like she was actually considering whether her own son was some kind of predator. How she'd let Tom erase every trace of my father from our home without protest. "Yes," I said finally. "I'm prepared." That afternoon, I met with a lawyer Jack recommended. He reviewed the documents, his expression growing increasingly grim as he flipped through the pages. "This is straightforward," he said when he finished. "The house is yours, no question. Your mother has been living there, essentially as a tenant since you turned 18, though I'm sure she didn't see it that way. We can file for eviction immediately. And Tom?" I asked. He smiled, though there was no humor in it. "Your stepdad has no legal standing whatsoever. He's not on the deed, not on the will, not on anything. Legally speaking, he's a guest who's overstayed his welcome." We spent the next hour going over my options. I could demand immediate eviction, giving them the minimum legal notice required. Just 3 days in our state. I could offer a longer timeline as a courtesy. I could even negotiate some kind of rental agreement if I wanted to maintain ownership, but allow them to stay. That night, I sent my mom a text. It was simple, direct. You have 1 week to leave the house. I know the truth about Dad's will. My heart pounded so hard as I hit send that I could feel it in my fingertips. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew it couldn't be worse than what I had already lived through. Update 2, I waited for the explosion. It came almost immediately. First, a call that I let go to voicemail, then a barrage of texts from Mom that oscillated between confusion, denial, and guilt-tripping. "What are you talking about?" the first one read. "This isn't funny, Chris. Please call me back. We need to talk about this. You can't just throw your family out on the street after everything I've done for you. This is how you repay me?" I didn't respond to any of them. I couldn't. I knew if I heard her voice, if I engaged in any kind of back and forth, I might weaken, might start to doubt myself again. So I silenced my phone and tried to focus on my homework, though the words on the page seemed to blur together. Then came a text from an unknown number. "Tom, you ungrateful little shit, your mother is in tears. Is that what you wanted? To hurt her more than you already have? That one?" I almost responded to my thumbs hovering over the keyboard as I composed and deleted a dozen different replies. In the end, I just blocked the number. This wasn't about hurting Mom. It was about reclaiming what was mine, what Dad had intended for me to have. The next morning, as I was leaving for class, I found Lindsay waiting by my car. She appeared smaller, somehow less confident, without Tom and Mom supporting her up. "You can't do this," she murmured, her voice missing its normal sharpness. "Where are we supposed to go?" I felt a sense of remorse. Lindsay, for all her faults, was still simply a kid caught in the thick of adult problems. But then I recalled how she'd lied about me, how she'd been an eager participant in Tom's plot to push me out. "That's not my problem," I responded, stepping past her to unlock my car. "You have a week. I advise you start packing." She followed me, clutching my arm. What if I told everyone the truth? That I lied that night at dinner? "Would you let us remain then?" I glanced at her, momentarily astonished by the disclosure. Although I knew it wouldn't make a difference, I wanted to say yes in order to use this as leverage to clean my reputation. Tom would simply come up with another method to turn me into the antagonist. For that, it is too late. Finally, I replied as I carefully took her hand off my arm. "I own the house. It was always that way. Right now, that's the only truth that counts." I saw her in my rearview mirror as I was leaving. In the street, standing by myself. I nearly felt terrible for her for a second. Any pity I could have had vanished when I recalled the expression on her face over dinner that evening, the deliberate hatred in her eyes as she recounted her lie. A week went by painfully slowly and quickly at the same time. I tried not to worry about what was going on at home and instead threw myself into my job and studies. My home. My lawyer received the eviction notice from me and formally served it. Jack had remained firm and told Mom that this was between her and me, even if she had called him hysterical. I had trouble concentrating on anything on the day of the eviction. Half expecting another round of texts from Mom, I kept checking my phone, but nothing was there. The rage had been nearly as bad as the stillness. Later that afternoon, I received a call from my attorney. "Just," he replied, "they're gone. The locks are now being changed by the locksmith. Would you want to visit the property? The land?" My house was lowered to a legal phrase. I was dazed as I drove there. I have no idea what I would find. Would they have been spiteful and destroyed the place? Would I have been left with nothing if my mother had stolen everything? When I entered the driveway, the house's unremarkable exterior caught my attention. The bushes were a little overgrown, and the blue paint had faded. I could almost imagine that the house from my youth was still there if I squinted, before everything collapsed before Tom. At the front door, Michael greeted me and gave me a set of keys. "All yours," he said. They kept the furnishings in its original condition, but removed their personal stuff. Under these circumstances, I took the keys and gave a blank nod. In my hand, they felt weighty, the combined weight of winning and losing. The emotional fallout was harsh, despite the fact that I had evicted Tom and taken back my home. There was no sense of victory. I was plagued by my mother's letter. reading it and wondering whether there was a way back from this cliff we had found ourselves on. I kept pulling it out. Could I pardon her? Must I? I was still unable to convince my mother that I wasn't the bad guy in this tale. She could even admit Tom's manipulation now that she is aware of her own shortcomings. However, a part of her continued to accept his falsehoods about me, that I was self-centered, not grateful. His own mother had been sent out onto the street by his son. It was more painful than I had anticipated. When I was at my lowest, I would catch myself wondering whether I could have done something differently. However, I would then recall the reality. I didn't cause this. This was about me finally standing up for myself and getting back what was rightfully mine, what my father had wanted me to have after. Tom had manipulated her and turned her against me. I gradually reclaimed the house over the course of the following few weeks. I purchased new furniture that matched my style, repainted my bedroom, and put up posters, not Tom's, in the backyard. I even planted a new maple tree where my dad and I had previously planted one. Tom, on the other hand, did not pass peacefully. By arguing that he had improved the property and raised its worth, he attempted to challenge the eviction. Threatening letters demanding payment were sent by his attorney. Michael handled everything calmly and effectively, brushing off every accusation as the desperate clutching that it was. He has nothing to stand on in court. My attorney told me that he was aware that he was not entitled to the property. His resistance just serves to highlight his sense of entitlement to things that aren't really his. The threat eventually diminished. Lindsay and Tom relocate to a different state. One of my old classmates told me that he had acquired a new job and a fresh start. A part of me questioned whether he would locate another unmarried mother to control and another family to ruin. However, that was no longer an issue for me. "We're not back to where we were, Mom," she calls occasionally, and I've started to answer, but I'm not sure we will ever be. We discuss subjects that are neutral: her new work at a different hospital, my classes, and the weather. We take care not to bring up Tom, the home, or the unpleasant past. Even though the truce is shaky, it's something. I have no idea what the future will bring. The house still feels too empty on certain days, too many ghosts. On other days, I take a silent delight in taking back what is rightfully mine. And having resisted the guy who attempted to remove me from my own existence. This is what I do know. Tom attempted to convince me that I was someone I'm not. I am more resilient than I realized and stronger than I believed. And my dad could have known it all along. He may have left me the house for that reason. In addition to being a place for me to live, it serves as a reminder that I have the freedom to defend my rights, hold my ground, and create a life that is genuinely mine.